This is Hunt Nebraska, the official podcast for insight into Nebraska's hunting and shooting sports community. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, our space for sharing stories, information, tips, and techniques. Now, Hunt Nebraska. And a big hello and welcome back to the Hunt Nebraska cabin, everybody. We are enjoying, as best we can anyway, our off season here in the state of Nebraska. A lot of dreaming going on with big game permit sales going forth. The draws have been up and down. Some people happy, some people not happy. That's just the kind of the gamble you take.
Just the way it goes.
Still some opportunities. As we speak, some of the over-the-counter unlimited tags are on sale, and some others, the limited quality, will be going on the sale if they're not already on sale by the time you listen to this. But real quick, we've got Michael Addison in from the National Wild Turkey Federation. He's our Nebraska R3 hunting and shooting sports coordinator for the state. We've got the Jeff Rawlinson, Nebraska Game and Parks, Kayla Gattikin once again. I said Gattikin. That's the maiden name. Kayla McKay. Officially Kayla McKay, almost a year now.
Almost over a year.
Over a year?
Over a year.
When did you guys celebrate your anniversary?
The end of May.
End of May. Okay,
we
that was a test.
went to Alaska. That's how we celebrated.
There you go.
So he's thinking that was a honeymoon. He was thinking that was just like a month or two ago.
Yeah. It goes by faster. I am to the point in the life where years go by like months.
Oh, like picking
and months like days and things like that. But that is Kayla McKay on mission control, pushing the buttons, making us sound good and all that stuff. Me, Hershy, over here. And folks, we've got a fun one to talk about today. Banning of lead ammunition. Now, we'll kind of set the stage here just a little bit, but I got to know, have you guys bought, Jeff, I know you pulled something out in the draw for one of your deer hunts. Has anyone else hit our brand new online permit system and bought one of their big game tags yet?
I was denied an elk tag. So if it makes anybody feel better, I was denied an elk tag.
They denied the Jeff Rawlinson an elk tag.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I'm sure I looked at it too. And
celebrity tags must have already been out, gone.
I thought for sure I was a shoe-in this year. I thought for sure. But I will say this though, we've got a brand new system, so so get on it early when you are buying tags because you're going to have to navigate it. But hats off to the team at the Game and Parks that's been putting this new system together because they have been working. I mean, they have been working on it. I have heard stories of late midnight hours trying to make sure the system was functioning for making sure that everything was ready to go for the next morning for a big buy, a purchase day. So hats off to that team. They have done a marvelous job at this transition. Huge transition.
Going to be some growing pains, always are with something like that and of that magnitude. And let's face it, it's a system that some of us, not us in here necessarily, deal with it on a consistent basis. Someone within our agency on a daily basis, us probably, especially on the hunter ed side, probably almost weekly, if not, for sure monthly basis. But you get into this time here, probably nearly daily for our own Hunter Nikolai. But a lot of folks use it once a year. 2-3 times a year at most. So definitely jump on there, get to know all the ins and outs, even if it's prior to when you're going to try to buy your particular permit. You're going to want to check that out, and it'll go a lot smoother if you know you can log in and do all the things that you need to do. So good stuff. Anyone else? Have you bought anything yet,
I have
Michael?
Not bought anything yet since turkey season.
Kayla?
I bought my Season's Choice tag.
All right, there you go. I have plans. to get my archery permit. I have plans.
You better get it bought before.
Well,
it's unlimited. So.
It was one of those things. I wanted to be one of the first in line, digitally speaking, of course. But over the weekend, all of a sudden, we were at a family reunion and went to go use the old handy dandy Shields card, and it got denied. At the gas station, I think it was.
Too many points?
No, somebody, the same time that we were in, east of the muddy Missouri, trying to go to this family reunion, someone was in the state of Arizona purchasing stuff. A lot more exciting than the stuff that I was purchasing, because just hearing the hundreds of dollars they were trying to spend. And luckily, the card folks caught it real fast. But I'm still awaiting my new card. So we'll see.
We'll give you a buy this time.
Because I do need points. I do want some points. It's kind of fun. Isn't that a fun game to play at times?
Well, it's a bittersweet.
I got to buy stuff.
It's bittersweet when that card comes in the mail. Is it going to be a 25, a 50, a 75, or 100? Now, when it's 100, pretty cool. but you realize you have to spend a lot of money to get to 100. Not so cool. Now you're dreading what it's going to look like.
It might not necessarily be free money, even if you're paying it off every month, but because they know your purchasing habits. And I'm guessing that's what happened, is whoever it was in Arizona doesn't know my purchasing habits, and they just completely went off, probably a bunch of health stuff like exercise equipment, the old Nordic track, a treadmill, something like that. And they're just thinking, nope, that's not the Aaron I know.
It's nice of you to assume they were trying to
better
better
Hershey.
themselves, Hershey.
How'd you guys find out there was a problem? Well, it was a bunch of exercise. Yeah, it got me there, that's for sure.
They seemed athletic.
You're spending money at Whole Foods?
So you get to keep the points when they do that?
Yeah, or, it was a little bit scary because I flipped over the card as Leslie was driving down the highway, and I called the number on the back, and it sent me right to the fraud division. I'm thinking, what? I didn't push any buttons here, but it automatically set it up, and they did, which I'm thankful for in a lot of cases. But as soon as I get that card, I've got a permit.
I know what it was. They were buying Diet Mountain Dew.
That's got to be embarrassing when they call and say, "Well, Mr. Hirschberger, we noticed a treadmill on there, so we flagged that."
Yeah. So, all right. Well, one of the things that really caught our attention this week, and Jeff, I'll let you frame this. I've got some other things in here, some bullet points and whatnot. But this is something that you've been involved with for some time, and something that all four of us, in fact, our agency has been involved with to some extent. The four of us, at least outside of Jeff, has kind of been on the purchasing side and the use thereof of some of this ammunition. But we heard that our friends kind of the northeast of here in the state of Minnesota making a little bit of a leap when it comes to lead ammunition and where it can be used in the state.
They did, and this is interesting. I learned, of course, that the state of Minnesota, through their own agency regulation capacity, if I understand it correctly, passed regulation within their agency that, or excuse me, through their agency, but that outlaws lead use of any lead ammunition on their scientific natural areas. And I am kind of making a leap here that those are areas that have protection on them but allow for recreation. They're wildlife management type areas that allow for different types of regulation, from some hunts to bird watching to hiking, and they call them softer recreational type activities on those areas. And I know certainly a lot of incredibly important flora and fauna flora and fauna on those areas that the Minnesota DNR wants to protect, as do the people of Minnesota. And so they've essentially outlawed the use of lead ammunition in those areas. Now, that's an interesting one, and it's certainly caught the attention of many states and industry as well, because it's kind of one of those, in the Midwest especially, one of those first big efforts to do something with lead ammunition. This has been a talk for a lot of years, ever since the 80s and the ban on lead ammunition in waterfowl hunting. But this is a little different now. This goes beyond that, obviously. This is all lead ammunition. And
to give you a little bit more on this comes from the Duluth, where have we got? Duluth News Tribune, and then this was from July 11th, posted at 3 p.m. by John Myers. St. Paul, Minnesota. Minnesota will require non-toxic ammunition for most special hunts held in state parks and scientific and natural areas starting this fall. And we've seen that scientific and natural areas abbreviated as SNA, so you'll hear me say that a time or two. The state park hunt requirement was set to go in effect into 2022, but was delayed due to Department of Natural Resources assessment that supply chain issues had limited non-toxic ammunition options for the hunter. So it was actually, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Minnesota's been dabbling with this for some time. The non-toxic requirements will impact the relatively few hunters who hunt in SNAs. This is Duluth News Tribune's words, not ours. It will apply to both rifle bullets and shotgun pellets. Hunting is allowed only on 56 of the state's 166 scientific and natural areas, which are generally off limits to hunting or gathering and are set aside to preserve biodiversity of special species of plants and animals, just like you talked about, Jeff. The areas included in the lead ban will be listed in the guide. Hunting, just like in Nebraska, generally prohibited in state parks, except we've got special approval, same with them. But some offer special youth, antlers, archery, muzzleloader, and other deer hunts to reduce deer populations. It is interesting. There are 66 different special hunts in state parks there in Minnesota. They have one youth state park deer hunt in a shotgun-only zone that will be exempted from the lead ban for some reason. but those hunters will be required to remove their gut piles from any deer shot to prevent other animals from scavenging lead fragments. So this is kind of interesting. I did a little bit more background on this too, Michael. And Minnesota as a whole, Jeff, you mentioned some national things. In 1991 is when the Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal government, let's say, completely banned the use of lead ammunition for waterfowl hunting across the U.S. Before that, some states did some different things in phases and whatnot. There were some other states. New Hampshire in 2000 banned lead tackle. 2013, Massachusetts banned fishing weights 1 ounce or less. New York and Vermont banned the sale of fishing weights a ½ ounce or less. I didn't get a year on that one. 2013, California was the first state to fully ban lead for all hunting. 2015, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, this is an interesting one, banned lead ammo and fish tackle on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lands in January. Now, if you remember, in 2015, there were some things going around in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, actually the Department of Interior. As one director went out, they placed this ban on those items. And in March, the individual that came into that position repealed that also. So that was in January, it was banned. In March, it was okay again. Recently, Minnesota, New York, Maine, Washington, Oregon have all introduced some sorts of legislation. In Minnesota's lead work at the state level within the DNR and legislatively, it looks like they've been looking at different types of things as far back as I could find or willing to go was 2015, when the DNR proposed regs to ban lead shot for upland game on wildlife management areas in the state, which are similar to the wildlife management grounds we have here in Nebraska. 2016 tried to do the same thing, and I think that a lot of voicing from the hunters and those folks that would be impacted by that is what changed the mood there. 2021 introduced bill to ban possession of lead while hunting statewide. 2022, that lead ban passed that you were talking about, Jeff, and I mentioned in the News Tribune from Duluth article there. Delayed due to supply chain issues, and then this year, lead ban for fishing tackle was introduced. So, then the ban took place now, and now they've also got some legislation looking at lead banning for fishing tackle in Minnesota as well. And I do believe that there is an area. I don't think that it's going to be a statewide fishing tackle ban. I think there is a trumpeter swan area within the Twin Cities or thereabouts that it will be imposed, which is kind of interesting. And fishing's big as well as hunting in Minnesota, so it's kind of interesting. So this is one that you just kind of step back and like,
well, it's a big deal. It's a real big deal. Like I said, there's not been a lot of bans like this that have just outright banned all lead ammunition on public grounds. Certainly there have been some national banned efforts and then some other states, but you start to see things like this. You're starting to see a little bit more of this kind of discussion and then actions taken. What makes this one interesting is it's a kind of like a commission action, if you will, and so a commission order, and so then that's where I think some of the concern has come out of. Well, this is something that's a commission order or a department order, meaning that it didn't go through the legislative process; it went through the department, and that one honestly doesn't. I know that bothers some. It doesn't bother me as much because, commissions make orders all the time. They have the authority. That's why there's the authority within the commission to make orders.
We use them to make seasons.
That's right. We use them to make seasons. We use them to promulgate rules and regulations for wildlife management. We use them to promulgate rules that don't go through that process, that legislative process all the time. So I know there's some that would advocate that, well, this is a big deal. It should have gone through that process. I'm not judging whether it should or shouldn't have. It's just not out of the norm for a commission like that to pass an order that would become law, that it would be a law affecting hunting or fishing or recreational use.
And one thing I do want to point out, Minnesota being a DNR, Department of Natural Resources, have a lot of similar charges as a group like the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. They've also got some outside, and we've got some that vary. They're headed up by a commissioner, which would be very similar to what our director would be. And then they have some assistant and deputy commissioners and things like that. A little bit different terminology for those that know the way Nebraska works is we have commissioners that sit on a board that are members of the public that then kind of help direct some of the larger agency things as well. And this came, from what I've seen documented, it was, like you said, a commissioner order. It was not necessarily from the team. It was just... It's been obviously it's going to be attributed to the current head commissioner right now, who was appointed in January 2019.
Yeah, And an interesting topic because, like I said, the whole country is having this discussion. And
why is that?
Well,
give us a little background. Obviously, you
there's
said
a lot
for
of
waterfowl, it was a couple decades ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. One is we have more science, a little bit more science. So we're starting to hear about more studies that are looking more into lead and starting to suggest, okay, we see individual level issues in lead, some population level issues. I wouldn't say that that's very pronounced in the research just yet, but starting to see some impacts that you can make your own decisions on when you read the research. But I think society in general is having more conversations. One of the things we learned here about millennials and generations, kind of X, Y, and Z, is they're very much motivated by doing things for the environment. And of course, we as well have marketed to those individuals for hunting and fishing, because making that connection between being a hunter, being a fisher, being a shooting sports enthusiast provides incredible support for the environment through your funding and through your efforts in the field. And so they're very much motivated by those efforts. So I think there's some of that as well. But I think everybody needs to probably exercise caution, because you can certainly show a picture of an animal, whatever animal you might want to, and just get a gut wrenching reaction from thousands, if not millions. Nobody likes to see any animal sick. That doesn't look good, doesn't make anybody feel good. One thing you always have to keep in mind, the North American model of wildlife conservation is rooted in science. One of the 7 tenets of the wildlife model in North America is rooted in science, and that's a big one. We don't have a lot of people just sitting around a table saying, "Well, here's what we ought to do." It's a scientific body, scientific community, scientific review, and then we make decisions for fish and wildlife, for our constituents, for the public, for the resources, based in science. So anytime there are perceptions there that, well, where's the science, or is it based in science? If you're asking that question, that's always going to get people's hackles up. And so this particular subject is one of those where there's science on one end of the discussion saying, well, we're seeing this, and then there's science on the other end of that discussion saying we're not seeing this. And so it's polarizing to some degree, right? And of course, there's always going to be those people that you're on one side of the fence or the other. Maybe it's guns, maybe it's hunting, but you're on one side of the fence. So if I'm against hunting, and somebody tells me, well, these lead bullets are bad. Of course they're bad. They're just that's one more thing that's bad, right? If I'm a pro-hunting individual and they say this isn't causing, of course it isn't causing anything. There's no problem there. Of course, so those polarizing effects, you got to kind of weed through those and tease them apart, and then get to what I call the science and make some decisions based on what we're seeing. And there is science. We have species of concern. The California condor being a species of high risk. There, when you say, well, gee whiz, it's only affecting a few animals at a time. Well, we only got a few animals, right? So we can't afford to lose very many. So there's a pro argument that, managing lead ammunition to some degree in those flight zones or those sensitive areas might certainly make sense in the context of impacts. But then you go to something that's much broader, something that was much bigger. Like, for example, say let's take bald eagles, because bald eagles has certainly been a hot button lately with respect to lead. We had some recent study approach that comes out that suggested that those bald eagles that were found that were sick and dying, 30% of them had ingested lead or had lead in their tissue. Now, that's true. I mean, that study, I don't discount that that's what they found. But, again, you have to take it within context, right? If I say to you that, geez, we saw all these sick and dying bald eagles, and a third of them had lead in them, you'd go, by God, that sounds bad, that darn lead. But then you got to think about it. What was the sample size that I was working from? Well, just the sick and the dying. Well, how is that 30% of all bald eagles are going to die of lead? No, that's not what that's saying. It's saying that the sick and dying ones that we found in the study had lead in their tissue. I don't know if it even suggested they all were dying of lead, but had lead in their tissue. So then you start to extrapolate from there and go, okay, so population level wise, they're still increasing. I mean, there's not a decrease in bald eagles. They're still increasing at an increasing rate. And so is lead adding mortality? Well, in that study, it was one of the first big population level studies that I'm aware of that said, yes, it probably is adding population level mortality. However, the population is still increasing at an increasing rate, just less of an increasing rate than it was before. Well, it's not such a big deal. Now, you can come at it from the angle, well, that's not any bald eagles. That's bad, right? Any bald eagles, timeout. Caution. That's a caution, because then you start to say, well, then what other wildlife species that is any individual mortality going to be not tolerated, right? I mean, where do we draw that line? Well, gee whiz, we're going to hit rabbits with cars, so therefore no more driving. I mean, I want to make it. I don't want to offend anybody with making it simplistic, but there's an argument there as well. So you do have to be cautious on how it's interpreted.
So, folks, as you're listening to this or watching us on YouTube, we appreciate that. I know you've got some comments, thoughts, ideas. Make sure you get those posted down below so we can address those as well. This is something that we'll probably be talking about for some time. We have been since like you said, the 80s.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm sure it's going to go for some time. Now, keep in mind a few things while we have this discussion and debate to some extent, that we've got to play devil's advocate from time to time and talk,
understand
from both sides. As well as so this is a safe zone for all of us that are in here, regardless of the way you may feel or think at times. But also, for those that are listening within the great state of Nebraska, we are not talking about a lead ban in Nebraska any further than we currently have.
Correct.
And you got to put it there, because it's one of those things. A lot of states can say, well, we don't have any lead bans. Untrue. If you have waterfowl hunting in the state, you have a ban on lead. And that's more federally imposed, though I think most states have kind of adopted ordinances or orders or regulations to the same extent in what they allow and what they don't allow. Also here in the state of Nebraska, beyond that, regardless of what you might be hunting with a shotgun using pellets, we have certain wildlife management areas that also have lead bans on them for various reasons as well. So we do have some of those that you do need to know and do need to follow. But I also want to preference this before I start tossing out some questions here is, what are you guys' background? What are your experiences with shooting non-lead ammunition? Kayla?
Mine doesn't go any further than steel.
Steel for ducks, pheasants,
everything.
Birds.
Yep.
All right. Michael?
I really don't know that I've ever shot much any non-lead. I mean, lead for deer, lead for turkeys, small game, anything like that. Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever actually used. Of course, I'm not a big waterfowl guy. Haven't really done any waterfowl hunting yet. I'm sure that'll change at some point.
But, I think job description demands it change.
Haven't had much non-lead experience yet. Although I've considered a time or two using some TSS, and then I look at the price tag, and I quickly decide that
it's great stuff. I'm telling you, it's great stuff. Fine. But it should be.
I was going to say, that is an interesting thing.
3-inch number 5 copper-plated leads works just fine for killing a gobbler.
And I'm glad you bring that up. Maybe after we finish around the table with my first question, we get into that, because opportunities and options have definitely changed since we all got started. Jeff, your experience with
I probably have more than most in this table here, because certainly with waterfowl, and I've probably shot more non-toxic or non-lead waterfowl, at least enough to have a glitch in the economy. I've made a little blurb. You can see it on the graph.
You can see it.
Yeah, and then of course for turkey, I've played with all kinds of loads, experimented with all kinds of loads, and I like I said, that's why I can tell you TSS. Whew, man, but. And rifle pistol, not as much hunting, more so at the range, and we can talk about all the pros and cons. But I can tell you this: every firearm is finicky, and I've seemed to see more finickiness with non-lead pistol bullets and rifle bullets than I have with traditional lead or copper-jacketed rifle and pistol bullets. And so, they're for what it's worth. But when they work, as far as accuracy and velocity and all that, when they work great.
I was going to say, my experience has mainly been on the pellets, just like you were talking about, Kayla. Loved to waterfowl hunt, upland bird hunt with it. Steel was kind of the go-to option for both of those. I've been toying around with bismuth quite a bit the last couple of years, even when I don't need to. been using that at times. My first time shooting a single projectile was through the old shotgun where we were required to deer hunt with slugs, and that was with some copper solids, and enjoyed the snot out of those compared to some of the old pumpkin balls and loss of accuracy with some of those original ones. That said, I can't say that I've shot a lot through a rifle by any means, by a center fire rifle, that is. My muzzleloader days have all been soft lead, and that one's for obvious reasons. I think there are some options there, but not many. But that said, with the slug, I couldn't see now that I'm comparing apples to crab apples. Is that a good way to say it, Michael?
Because you could put it that way.
The old, I'm comparing the old pumpkin ball through a smooth bore 12 gauge shotgun that had a little rifling on the lead, which did help spin that slug a little bit, to a rifled 12 gauge barrel and a sabot copper sabot. I guess
I'd say there'd be quite the performance difference there.
There was, but price kind of came into it as well. Now that said, I've also in recent times have found some steel loads just as cheap as I have some of the lead loads, especially they're a year or two for doves and things. And I had no thought at all about swapping that out. All my firearms can handle it. Haven't noticed a real lack of performance for many years. I mean, when I first got into waterfowl hunting, there was a significant difference between lead ammo and the steel options that were there at the time in the late 80s, early 90s. However, that said, it adjusts a little bit. There's still some adjustment, feet per second, a little bit on lead, and some perhaps more perceived than real. But at the same token, it is all effective when used right. And like you mentioned, Jeff, in the right setup, you're always matching your ammunition to your firearm, whatever's happening. So that is our experience with it. And this is one of those things that, like I said, you kind of alluded to it, Michael. When steel first came out, you had to use it. Back when they had to use it for ducks and geese. Now,
and it was a cluster a little bit.
It was definitely a cluster. We got the cart before the horse. The technology that was there wasn't set up for steel and that light load. Now there's a lot of folks that it's almost a badge of honor. I use bismuth. Very few people would have to be convinced that TSS is slightly better than the lead load that they're using right now, unless you don't like super tight patterns and number 9s that hit like lead 5s or anything like that. But I mean, there's kind of a cool factor to it.
Well, when you look at a box of lead shot, it's almost today like, oh, that old archaic cheap stuff, that could hardly kill a turkey, right? But all the cool stuff, all the new stuff, and a lot of the technology is in a lot of the non-lead stuff, right? And so you look at that, and it's $30 a box, and this stuff over here is maybe $9.99, and you're thinking to yourself, it might be $30, but my God, it just slays dragons. I mean, this is the stuff. Well, but that wasn't the case earlier.
And stuff like tungsten, it has other applications. You can use maybe a lighter firearm, smaller firearm. Sure. Things like that. There's other benefits beside just non-toxic with things like tungsten, but it's just one of many considerations.
And kudos to the ammo manufacturers that have really stepped up their game and looked at new powders and new wads and new ways to do things and continue to do that. But I just was reminded, I got an email from one of the bismuth manufacturers that I have made use of. And they now have a program, Kayla, and you're just going to love this. You can be part of their team, part of their buy into this membership club for just $150 a year. You can get some discount, perhaps on ammunition. You get some discounts on some of their hoodies and things like that. Maybe a chance to buy some things because it's short run.
And in return, you're becoming a brand rep for them. Is that the
I would say
I'm not sure you can be a brand rep for anybody, Hershey. So, I think that we have to put the box on that.
I just love that. $150 for the year, and you're one of us.
Yeah. Now how much would you pay?
and that just gets you the ability to. It's kind of like they've been listening to the universities too much. Well, for this donation level, we'll let you donate more so you can have season football tickets in this area. Not that area. That's too good.
You get a free set of tickets.
But if you donate 3 more times, you can get into that area.
You get this for free. But let's go back because I think this is very important. 1988, 89, all this big discussion, 1990, all this kind of discussion really boils over 91. Boom, no more lead on waterfowl.
And I'm going to preface this too. Similar species are still being talked about when it comes to lead toxicity. Sure. Loons, water birds, things like that.
Well, and not only that,
so this is very important.
Yeah, it is, but it really wasn't the reason we banned it in the first place. We did notice there was some toxicity, but when it came to waterfowl, but at the population level, I don't think we were seeing huge increases in toxicity to lead. I think it was measurable, certainly, but it was more along the lines of some of the non-target, like predators and such, that were eating those carcasses, and that was causing all kinds of problems that was of huge concern.
I think there were large die-offs that were attributed to lead in some of their larger staging and wintering areas, and so they were seeing quite a few waterfowl, including species of concern, out there as well. But
I should say there were other things that attributed to that.
Yeah, definitely. And with waterfowl, folks, if you're not a waterfowl hunter, they congregate in big numbers in certain spots, and they do so traditionally.
Yeah, and in some point areas, certainly there were some major impacts, no question about it. And I don't know what I read somewhere about the percentage overall of added mortality to waterfowl, and I don't remember the number. It was I think it was less than 10. It was under 10 from if I recall. But bottom line is there was reasons, but it was enacted. It was acted pretty quickly, and it was enacted in a way. And if you think there's a problem, that's what we have the ability to pass laws for, right? We address those problems. However, it took a while for the industry to catch up. Like I said, the technology wasn't there. The wads, we didn't have the right wads, right? We didn't have necessarily even the right barrels, but in some shotguns. But the technology had to catch up. We didn't know how to use it. Once the technology started catching up, our hunters were still just going out and buying steel and, shooting it like lead, right? So number 2 steel, number 2 lead. Or number 2 lead, number 2 steel. And they were finding out that's not going to work. Nope. And so it really took years. In fact, I can tell you today it's probably not as big of an issue in our hunter ed classes, but I remember certainly teaching hunter ed classes in the 90s where it was one of the key things you had to get in and help them understand because people did not understand the difference. You had to go change 2 sizes over from lead to steel that, it won't destroy your barrel. I remember being in hunter ed classes where dads would argue with me that I'm not shooting that stuff in my kid's gun. It'll bulge his barrel. Why? Because a few people had little rings in their barrels when they shot steel because the wads and the barrels weren't necessarily designed for steel. And so, it took us years to dig out of that. And I think that that's important for this context because if we're going to have these discussions today and say, okay, now it's lead bullets, lead, rifle pistol bullets, it's lead, shot for upland game and all that kind of stuff. If that's the conversation that collectively the community wants to have, then it needs to collectively be a community conversation. And we need to get the right people in the room so that we can start talking with industry and we can start talking with our hunters and we can start talking with those who care about, like our hunters, also care about the environment but don't hunt, and bring everybody to that room and start planning into the future so that we can take science and start planning into the future so that if we are going to have changes in the future, our hunters and our industry are able to adapt rather easily to it.
Yep, and they've been adapting for some time. Like you said, basically they were taking out lead pellets and putting in steel pellets early on. And same wads, the boxes might be different colors so you knew which is which. Yeah. You and I both remember still seeing the lead box, Winchester Super X or whatever said duck and pheasant on it or something like that. They had to start changing it just to duck or just to pheasant. But it is kind of interesting. And there's more groups and smaller groups popping up to address some of this stuff. So now I'm going to toss out some questions. And again, this is crystal ball stuff. We're not talking about anything here in the state of Nebraska other than what we already have. So keep that in mind. But I'm going to go around the room and as you folks can tell, Jeff is well versed in this, so he's going to be the one that answers this last. All right, Kayla and Michael, you got to get ready. Will we see more restrictions on the use of lead in ammunition in the future? That's question number 1. Michael, you want to tackle that one?
Yes, I think we will. I'm going to give a caveat to that saying if industry catches up and non-lead options become more affordable and widely available, I think there'll be a lot of voluntary adoption. But if there's a struggle, we're still kind of at the same pace where TSS is really expensive. Maybe your bismuth shot and other things are a little more expensive. Then there might be some. It all just depends on your whatever state government's in place and things like that. But I think eventually it's going to.
I'm going to break my own rule here, because I know tungsten. Again, that's one that we haven't had to convince a lot of people of its effectiveness, and there's people that want to use it. But like you said, you get a little sticker shock when you look at that.
Yeah.
Wow. How much will it take me to get into that box of 5 shells of TSS? Oh my goodness! More than anything, I believe our source is outside the country for a lot of tungsten.
I think you're right.
In shells and everything else.
A lot of those rare precious metals.
Yeah, and it might not be one of our greatest allies either, which is kind of interesting. Jeff, do we have any idea? Because obviously, when you were talking about the 80s and 90s, when we started doing that, in 91 it became across the board. Obviously, hunters at that time, prior to that ban, everybody was using lead. There wasn't really much other options out there. And then we started requiring steel. Any idea in your conversations what percentage of our hunters right now already voluntarily just use non-toxic or non-lead shot? That's a better term.
Good question. I don't have that number. My gut feels it's a small number. That when it comes to rifle pistol bullets. When it comes to shotgun shells, it's a much larger number.
And that's a great distinction, because I think for shotgunners, we've kind of had it in the back of our head for some time. Yes. For some, it's been that simplicity, because I pheasant hunt in spots where I need it and some places that I don't. And it's just like, nuts to that.
Well,
I don't want 2 vests. I've done it. I don't want 2 boxes of shells and make a mistake. I've seen people do it, so I'm just going to go with one. And
the prices have caught up, right? I mean, a box of lead and a box of steel you can find comparable models of shell that are going to be roughly the same price, and so that's changed. We're talking generations now that have come after that. So the generation today has grown up just shooting steel shot, right? So that you don't think anything of it. And lead, they hear all these things about lead, so it's like, why would I even buy it? It's the same price. Everybody says this is better. And so, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
Rifle pistol, very small percentage.
And I guess one thing that we could look at in the rifle side of thing is since the ban in 2013 of California banning lead for all hunting, to see if their hunting numbers have, drastically declined due to that, or if it's, maintained or been kind of, a lot of states are kind of on a downward trend to begin with. So that might not be the, straightest cut example, but it'd be interesting to see what their numbers have done because of that. When they went, because remind me, Jeff, I think they just went cold turkey. It was, you could use it this season, but not next.
That's exactly what happened.
So it'd also be interesting to see what other options they went to. Did they just go straight to steel, or did they take other options like bismuth, tungsten?
Yeah.
Copper, rifle, pistol.
Are we talking about the initial ban in 91 or?
In California.
California. Yeah. And I believe they've looked at, they've approved a number of non-toxic, but, and that's where it'll get interesting, because, it's the conversation, right? If you ask people, is lead good? No one believes lead's a good thing, right? No one's, we need more
taking
of that.
out of paint, out of gasoline, out of
we need more lead, right? No, you've heard the term "get the lead out." Well, that's the whole world thinks that, right? And so, certainly there's a difference between metallic and and organic lead in what's naturally found in the environment and what's not. But we know from a young age that lead is bad, and we've been taught that. If you ask anybody, is it a good thing for any animal to ingest lead? I hope they would be smart enough to say no, it's not. We've not found any research to suggest that anybody does well for ingesting lead. And so you have to kind of nod at some of the baseline discussion. Lead is bad for any animal that ingests lead. I think everybody can agree with that. I don't know anybody's out there arguing that we need more lead in the environment. I don't know that that's an argument that most people are making. But I do think the argument then stems from, and this is the important piece, is what is having a systematic or population level impact, and what's having an individual animal impact. And I think we have to be, as a society, I think we have to have research to better understand that, and to be willing to either make the hard calls once we learn that of population level impacts, if we're having those, or be willing to also call it for what it is if we're not seeing those population level impacts.
And that's something that a lot of wildlife agencies, we have to manage at the population level, because you're going to always have, mortality at the individual level.
Well, yeah.
I just saw the worst video. I'm not sure how it popped up on my stream, but it's not uncommon to see a male, fully grown male black bear finding a bunch of young black bear cubs in their natural reaction to control the species.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty, folks. It's not pretty, but you can't ban adult male black bears, because what they do to black bear cubs, because you need those males out there. Anyway, moving on. And we're coming up against time, so I'm going to have to, it's amazing how fast this has really gone, Kayla. So I'm going to jump to the big question. So Michael already kind of weighed in for us that we probably will see more restrictions on lead in the future. In our lifetime...
Whose lifetime? Your guy? You and...
That is an important question.
Let's take an average. We'll say an average.
Yeah, that was painful, Kayla.
Yeah, we'll say an
but it's
average.
true. That's what's scary.
Will we see the end of lead ammunition for hunting in the United States? Not for shooting, but for hunting.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Just because things are very slow to get started. And for everybody to adopt it in the next 50 years, I think that is a huge step.
I'm thankful you said next 50 years.
Average. We're going on an average.
I'm going to sleep better at night myself, to be honest with you.
We got it in us, Jeff. We got it.
But the 100 mark is going to be a tough one.
You do bring up a great point. Since, early 90s, when the federal government said you're going to do this for ducks and geese, how many states are we talking about that have completely banned the use of lead in hunting?
One.
So that many years, one. Yeah, I mean, this one here, I got to say that the Minnesota lead ban wasn't as widespread or as huge as I first thought it might be after going through and seeing what it entails and all that stuff. I don't necessarily agree with how it was done by any means, but at the same token, it wasn't as big of a thought. I was thinking it was all their wildlife management areas, which would have been a huge shock across that state. But we're one, and it hasn't banned it on private ground. It hasn't banned it on anything like that. So, Michael, we'll toss this one out to you. So we've planted it 50 years in Jeff and I's lifetime. Will we see the end of lead ammunition in hunting?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe more restrictions on individual state levels, but I don't think it'll be completely and totally outlawed. Just because you have some states that they. Depends on the cartridge. They limit what cartridges you can hunt certain big game with because of the ballistic properties and things like that. And lead is one of those materials that just expands and fragments so well, and you don't get a lot of over penetration when you're hunting. And you can't do things like that with solid copper or solid brass or things like that. So I think you'll be quite a while before we develop technologies that have similar ballistic capabilities and things like that, where it's not going to be a threat to over penetrating a bunch when you're shooting, and just manufacturing and adoption and things like that.
Different question, Jeff. Different question, because we've already got a consensus here. Out of the 3 votes, 2 that say no, not in the next 50 years.
That's fine.
What's the impact if we were to ban lead ammunition completely right now?
Huge impact to our hunters. Huge impact to our shooters, huge impact economic model that drives conservation. Understand, and this is not an advocate for damaging the environment by any stretch of the imagination, but understand that anytime a person buys a firearm or any ammunition, 10% of that sale, now 11% of that sale goes back to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, distributed back to the states for wildlife conservation on the hunting, on the gun and ammo side. And it drives it's the economic engine for our conservation model. Now, most people look at that and think it's hunting license and permits. No, those are just the match we use to access those federal funds. So huge economic impact. It would have not just that, but a ripple effect. I think there would be people who would leave the sport of hunting. I think there would be people who it's confusing, it's more expensive, whatever. And so we would lose our rate of churn would increase dramatically. So it also have impacts to how much match we're able to raise on the side of buying permits so that we can access what would be now more limited federal funds. It would have impacts on the shooting sports. It would have a huge impact. In some states, like Minnesota, for example, I think it would have pronounced economic impacts with companies like Federal Ammunition housed there in Minnesota. In Nebraska, Grand Island, I think it could have impacts on organizations like Hornaday and other manufacturers. So I think we'd feel it in Nebraska too. Pretty sizable impacts.
All right. I think we're going to leave it right there, folks. We're not done having this conversation. We know you aren't either, so make sure that if you've got some thoughts, ideas, make sure you jot them down for us. We can talk about that another time because it's something that I think we're going to be talking about for years and decades to come. So we want to know your thoughts and ideas. But again, in the meantime, give us a thumbs up, give us a subscribe. So when the next one of these drops. But until next time.
Hunt Nebraska, brought to you by your Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.